Okay. Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Josh Howie. Transgender people who hide their biological sex from romantic partners may not be committing a crime. That's according to British prosecutors. The Crown Prosecution Service has published new guidance covering the crime of sex by deception. For example, someone tricking a partner into sleeping with them by pretending to be a different sex. Critics say it should give a sinister green light for predators, or could, so I say, to escape rape charges by claiming they are trans. Now, we are joined now by criminal defence lawyer Paul Britton. Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It's a little bit complicated, this. Let's just start. What is sex by deception? Just so people at least understand the basics.
So the McNally case in 2003 probably sets it out the best. I mean, it's 21 years old now. McNally was born a girl, female. She changed her sex or started to act like a boy and dress like a boy and deceived a partner, a female partner, into having sex. That individual obviously didn't give consent to have sex with a biological female, and when there was roughly 4 occasions that it happened, when it was found out that the boy, McNally, wasn't a boy, was a girl, then there was a criminal offence and McNally was prosecuted. Because the key part is the word consent. You have to be able to give informed consent, and the victim in that case had that ability taken away by being deceived and tricked into thinking that she was having sex with a boy.
Yeah, and there was a similar case a few years ago.
There has been a few cases, but we're talking about cases that have gone to the appeal court, so that a court in this land has defined it unequivocally.
Okay.
One of the key factors is the difference between sex and gender. Unfortunately, the case used gender a lot rather than sex in the case, and now, 21 years later, we have a more informed understanding of the difference between what a sex is and what a gender is.
So this is the thing, the CPS, they brought out this guidance, but it feels, well, it doesn't feel, it seems very contradictory. It says one thing and then pretty much says almost the opposite.
Well, I mean, you said it on your intro there about cynics and people who are cynical about it. It doesn't give a get-out-of-jail-free card at all, but it does use language that can antagonise someone who doesn't want to really read this sort of material and buy into it. So people that are sceptical of it in the first place. Okay. For example, you and I became commonly known as cis men that were born male, and we identify as male later on in life. We become a cis male. The guidance uses the term now non-trans. So you and I are now non-trans, just non-trans.
It's a Christmas miracle.
It's just difficult. I have to say, it's keeping up with the terminology as it evolves is a task in itself.
In a way, this is actually the end point of it, because it seems like it was always like everything was either going to be divided into trans or the holy class, so the holy class of trans, and then everybody else is non-trans.
Well, and another part of the guidance that's quite annoying is it constantly says how the language that it uses is not meant to be offensive in any way, and it shouldn't be seen as offensive. It also says that when it talks about trans people, that it's in no way suggesting that those sort of people are deceptive or would deceive someone. It is just general guidance. So it is kind of wrapping the reader up in cotton wool, for want of a word.
Well, I mean, talking about offence then, what about people who aren't trans now being referred to? I don't want to be referred to as a non-trans person. I want to be referred to as a man, but I'm sure women want to be referred to as women. Not as a non-trans.
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought we'd even have to consider these things at our stage of life? You know, I was born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s, and I never, ever once thought that I would have to think about how I was just always a man. It was very simple for me. But now, as a society, we are forced to think about these things so as to not cause offence or to commit an offence. The guidance does deal with very serious offences, rape, and like I said, it's not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Rape does carry the maximum sentence of a life imprisonment, although some people get upset when there is a minimum parole date. So you may get a life sentence, and in this country, life means life. But after 24 years, for example, you'll be able to make applications to come out on bail.
But unfortunately, as we've seen, so few of these cases actually then go to court, and then the conviction rate is it historically low?
I mean, it is low. I mean, you have to remember rape is only triable in the Crown Court. So in a Crown Court, you'll have 12 jurors deciding whether you are guilty or not. If they decide you're guilty, it will go to the judge for sentencing. So in a Crown Court, you are less likely, I should say, to be convicted than you would be in a magistrate's court, where you may have a judge sitting alone or a lay bench.
Well, but if that's the case, putting out this guidance that seems more confusing, that runs counter to actually getting more convictions.
I mean, I've read the guidance before coming on, and I didn't find it confusing, but that's probably because I read a lot of this sort of material.
Okay.
It would ordinarily take a lot of... You have to read it several times and probably come away from it and go back to it again. And it's incredibly long, so you need to read it to the end to start making sense of what you've read at the beginning.
But I understand that. I mean, and I don't have that lawyer's, I guess it's analytical brain here. But when you're dealing with things like law, like this, the point is to make it surely as simple as it can possibly be. And it feels like they've deliberately made it complicated from what I've read of it to kind of make it seem like, oh no, trans people shouldn't be in any way feeling like they are criminals and we should make everybody's feelings. When it comes down to law, it shouldn't really be about feelings.
That makes it convoluted.
Yes.
And reading it, so I didn't know that we are now non-trans. I've always thought that we were cis male. So when it does redefine those terms and then continually uses them, sometimes you have to go back and refresh yourself on what the guidance has defined that term as meaning. Yeah,
but for me, the term cis male is offensive because I'm not a cis, I'm just a male. And to say that even put the prefix before it is to sign up to an ideology that I frankly think is incredibly damaging.
Are you offended?
Yeah, well, I don't. Yeah, I hate it.
I'm not. I'm
not offended. Look, I get death threats and whatever, so it takes. I've got a pretty thick skin by now. But it is something that I don't want. I would be offended if that's how someone would refer to me as, in terms of, I certainly would never choose that term to refer to myself. Yeah, and I would probably be offended if someone forced me. And that's what it feels like. It feels like it's compelled speech. We don't want it rammed down our throats. It's okay that it's out there. And if it is a term, this is why sex is different to gender, because gender, what people are saying is gender evolves with society norms and what we start seeing gender as, which is why individuals do start identifying as different genders. But then we can't define that though, right? Whereas sex is immovable, really. We were born men and we'll always be men. Doesn't matter how much we try to change ourselves. If anyone did a blood test, they would... So they should really be putting, when they're writing guidance like this, using the term sex. And I know the government was... Well, the Tories, that's what they were trying to do before they got kicked out, was to make it very clear that this is what we're referring to. And it feels like when they're using these deliberate gender terms, it feels like a way of them deliberately muddying the water for ideology. And catching us out on new terms. Yes. Like the non-gender, and like I said, when I read it today, that was a first for me. Yeah, and it should be pointed out that, and Cresta made this point earlier, but it's not that any trans people would ever use this necessarily. It's more that once you have a loophole, the wrong-uns are going to go for that loophole. And that's what it feels like to me. They've left a loophole there, and they've done it because they weren't brave enough to just go, men are men, women are women, and that's how we're going to base our legislation and laws on. And it's a cop-out. So anyway, Paul, thank you so much. Happy New Year. Thank you for coming in. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Paul Britton, everybody. Next on Free Speech Nation, we'll answer more questions from tonight's live studio audience, including whether the Bible could actually be pro-trans rights. See you in a couple of minutes.